Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Make Your Marketing Measurement Matter, Strategies for Success. I'm your host, Kelsey Voss, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence in Seattle, and I'm joined by my colleague, Principal Analyst DaveFrankland in New York. Hi, Dave. Great to have you here.
Hey, Kelsey. Excited to be here.
Before we get into the main presentation, I'd like to thank Acxiom for making today's webinar possible, and welcome Tate Olinghouse, Chief Client Officer at Acxiom. Tate is joining us from Conway, Arkansas. Hi, Tate.
Hey, Kelsey. Thanks for having me.
A few things before we dive in. We have a ton of information to share, but there's no need to take notes. We'll email you a link to view the slides and the full recording. But we do want you to participate. Just use the chat window on the right to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. So with that, Dave, let's get started with our marketing measurement discussion. Over to you.
Thanks, Kelsey, and really excited. This is a topic that it's not necessarily a new topic. To some extent, it's a perennial, but it is something that is a constant challenge for marketers and something that's getting harder. And so actually, I'm going to spend a chunk of time today talking about some of the challenges that make marketing measurement harder today than it has been in the past. Then we'll spend some time looking at a key imperative for CMOs, which is sort of to develop a clear understanding of corporate strategy and demonstrate their contribution to it. It's not enough just to measure in channel. We need to ladder that up to the business and show that we're affecting business performance. And then we'll provide some advice for CMOs and their teams to sort of elevate their approach and to help show not just to drive that performance, but to show how they're driving business growth. So let's get into it, and let's start with this notion of why is marketing measurement so difficult. I hate to start on a down note, but this is something that has never been easy, and there's a lot of factors making it more difficult today. There is absolutely no avoiding the fact that CMOs are facing greater financial scrutiny in their roles. There are a whole bunch of factors that are converging to make marketing measurement even more challenging and even more complex. And the study that we're showing here is an October 2021 study by Advertiser Perceptions, in which you can see 91% of marketers responded that they agree that the advertising industry has become increasingly complex. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's a bunch of factors that they call out, ranging from different transaction methods for different media to industry regulation. But there's a bunch of other factors that they call out, including inconsistent measurement tools and disconnected point solutions. And so I want to do a short dive into 7 factors that we see affecting measurement today and that we think are contributing to its complexity. These are all things that marketers have to get their head around in order to solve this problem. And none of them, to be honest, there's no easy button for any of them. Let's start with video ad measurement. Our forecast, Insider Intelligence marketer forecasts, estimate that U.S. advertisers will spend more than $144 billion this year across linear TV and digital video. That includes connected TV. So $144 billion, that's obviously a lot of money. But across all of that, we don't have a common system of measurement that sort of connects the dots across mass, one-to-one, online, offline. For many, many years, TV networks advertisers relied on Nielsen as the sort of standard currency. But as digital came along, it got more complicated. Also, obviously, digital gave a lot more data to marketers. And for a long time, there were sort of complaints across the industry about Nielsen not adapting quickly enough to the new reality. And then over the last few years, it's really gone pear-shaped, where the Media Ratings Council has actually suspended its accreditation of Nielsen's national and local TV measurement. They did that late last year or fall last year. So since then, what we're seeing is there's a lot of new entrants, a lot of frenzy in the water around those new entrants. So folks like iSpot.tv and VideoAmp have partnered with networks and the multi-channel video programming distributors to develop alternative offerings. But to date, there is no industry standard measurement solution the way there had been in the past. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, this is a study from Advertiser Perceptions from last September. TV and video rank dead last in advertiser satisfaction. And that's in a list where fewer than half of the respondents are satisfied with any single channel. So, not only is it bad, it's worse than many other areas. It's not just video. You look at the whole digital ecosystem for years was built on the back of cookies, which we describe as a sort of zombie technology. It may well die at some point, but got another lease of life yesterday, or a stay of execution from Google. But we've been predicting the death of the third-party cookie for years, and they're just the pixelated equivalent of The Walking Dead. The study here on the right is from the IAB from February this year, their State of Data report. And the good news was they suggested a growing sense of preparedness for the sort of post-cookie future among data leaders at brands, agencies, and publishers. But when you dig into the detail in there, some of that confidence may be unfounded. The same study showed that fewer data leaders plan to adapt their measurement strategies this year compared with last year. And the IAB even pointed out that the industry is not moving fast enough to prepare for how the loss of third-party cookies will affect ad measurement. It's not going away. Again, Google giving a stay of execution really doesn't change much. This is a bigger conversation than just Google. And there's a lot of solutions out there that and a lot of experimentation. But again, that's causing similar fragmentation to what I discussed on the video front. Ad fraud, another huge challenge. The ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, estimate that it'll cost marketers $120 billion in wasted media buys in 2022. And they reckon about 18% of all internet traffic in the industry can be attributed to non-human bots. So it's not just Elon Musk that is shocked by the number of bots affecting the digital landscape, but it is undermining the whole ecosystem, makes measurement and attribution particularly challenging, and sucks up a lot of focus, time, effort, conversation between advertisers, publishers, and the tech vendors in between. It's just one of those things that's constantly causing friction in the industry. I am very certain that we will spend more time, especially with Tate joining us today, talking about data and identity, but if I can just level set, the idea of identity and recognizing customers across web properties in particular is increasingly challenging. And while we can't say for sure what's going to happen across the board, there's a few things we can call out, and that's sort of the ongoing consolidation among sort of the ad tech intermediaries, where we've seen a bunch of different acquisitions take place over the last few years. We've seen a huge emphasis on first-party data. Again, I'm sure we'll hear more from Tate on this later, but it's a major focus for companies over the past several years, and that's not going away. We're seeing a renewed interest on the other side of that, though, in contextual advertising. So without an identity solution, or without the trust in an identity solution, marketers relying on that contextual advertising. But obviously that's harder to measure and tie back to an individual. And then, especially in the EU, there's a potential for the deprecation of IP address as something that we can leverage, where in the EU, they're exploring the notion of defining this as PII that cannot be tracked. So expect more challenges down the road. Every time we think we've got one thing put back in the bag, something else pops out. So just again, as we talked about in the previous two slides, this is an area where there's a lot of industry initiatives. There's not a lot of standardization. So we see different solutions ranging from the Trade Desk and their UID2 to LiveRamp to Google, their attempt at the sandbox. There's a whole host of different solutions that are being proposed, but very little consolidation on a standard, as I say. And so that sort of complexity and ongoing changes we're going to continue to see for the next several years. And those are channels that have been around for a while. When you add into that, then sort of every now and then a new channel comes along and becomes the shiny object for marketers. Right now, we're seeing a lot of focus on retail media networks, and there's obviously a lot of heat and early exploration around the metaverse. But just as we've seen in the past, when other shiny objects came along, whether that was the web itself or mobile or social or anything else, these new channels and new ways of communicating often require new processes, technologies, systems, and importantly, new metrics. And they can be hard to ladder up to existing metrics, and they sort of sit out on their own, and we end up chasing vanity metrics in given channels unless they are tied to a larger system. But they're not always easy to measure, especially the beginning. And we're seeing a lot of that experimentation going on right now. Obviously, not a new topic again, but privacy regulation just adds to that challenge. Cookie deprecation is one of the issues, but independent of that, data privacy regulations have given consumers greater control over how companies capture and use their data. Even just the knowledge of what data is being captured and the opportunity to, in many cases, turn that off creates challenges for marketers to both target but also to measure. And consumers can deny marketers increasingly the opportunity to capture certain forms of data. So it makes it harder, obviously, to leverage it, but as I say, it makes it difficult to measure. If that data is inaccessible, it makes it difficult to measure the impact of the marketing. And then the last downer stuff I want to talk about, the last negative, is sort of the consumer is making it harder for us to measure. It's not all just technology, regulation, the tech platforms, et cetera. We've learned as consumers to manage our time and our identity behind firewalls and all sorts of other things. So, first of all, reaching consumers and earning their attention is increasingly difficult. We all consume media constantly and often across multiple devices at the same time. Our research, insider intelligence research here on the right, shows that almost 74% of the US population this year will browse the internet on a mobile device while watching TV. That's just one example. But we're doing that, sort of splitting our time across multiple media, such that even if we can measure that we've reached somebody, we don't necessarily know the attention that we've had and whether we've earned it or not. And then add consumer behavior on top of that, whether we use burner emails for subscriptions and commerce, whether we're skipping ads, downloading ad blocking software, obviously opting out of direct communication. All of that makes it more difficult for marketers to connect their activity to the consumer outcome and their behavior.
Hey, Dave, it's worth pointing out that in B2B, you also have the challenge of firewalls. Almost all businesses rely on email security firewalls, which not only can prevent emails from getting to the intended recipient, but can also impact results. They use bots to scan emails and even click through to web pages. These false opens and clicks can show up in marketing metrics.
Yeah, for sure. And also, obviously, the permission side of that too, what's allowed to come through, where it might look like something has been sent, but doesn't necessarily mean it's been received, right? Completely agree. So this whole measurement thing, right? It's always been hard. It's getting harder. I don't like my point here is not to bum everyone out, but what is the poor marketer to do? And the first thing I would say is that marketers have to act and to measure at different levels. It is important to track and understand how different initiatives and campaigns and channels perform. So I don't mean to say that you shouldn't be measuring these things, but at the same time, it's absolutely critical to elevate beyond those sort of tactical levels. It's easy to dismiss opens, clicks, and these things as vanity metrics. I actually don't think they're vanity if they're being used for a purpose. If that's all you're doing is celebrating the fact that open rates went up and not knowing what the impact of that is, then sure. It's something that's probably just being used to sell your boss. But if you're able to ladder that up, it can be really effective. So, to that end, we believe that this is a senior level issue. I'm gonna refer to it as the CMO for the rest of today, but it doesn't have to be the CMO. It can be any senior marketer at your organization, but it needs to be somebody that has sort of purview over the entire budget and also the permission structure to work internally. We're going to talk about some practical advice, and so it's really important that it's somebody who has that ability to go knock on doors, be able to set up meetings with other departments and to affect change throughout the organization. And so I think it's really important for the CMO to ensure that they start from a clear understanding of corporate strategy. And that might sound really obvious, but we did some CMO research earlier this year, and it was surprising how many, we spoke to the CMOs of some of the largest organizations in the world. And it was surprising how often it came up as, what one piece of advice would you give, which is always my last question when I'm talking to folks. And it's sort of the make sure you're tying marketing to the business objectives, to the business strategy. And only when you start to do that can you demonstrate your contribution to it. And that requires a measurement framework that ladders up, as I say, but it also needs to be sort of endorsed by the CEO and the CFO. And you know, that tying it to the business key performance indicators, that's not just the marketer's job to do that. You've got to do that collaboratively with the peers on that C-level, around that C-level table, and start to speak their language rather than expecting them to speak marketing's language. So let's look at 3 ways that we think marketers should be doing this. And, you know, as I say, one key initiative is to ladder those metrics. There's an annual CMO survey that Duke Fuqua does every year. And in this year's survey, they said that it was almost 6 out of 10 marketers claimed to have linked their digital marketing to outcomes. So on the one hand, you could sort of say that, well, that means 41.3% haven't. But still, almost 60% have done this is a decent number. It feels pretty strong, and it feels like somewhat of progress, but it only tells part of the story. Later in the survey, in that study, they said that only 40% of respondents said their CFO is aware of digital marketing KPIs. You know, and it's easy to think that marketing is tied to outcomes, as that almost 60% do. But if the CFO is not engaged, and if you're not evaluating sort of the financial impact, if you're not taking that holistic approach, you're going to fall short. You're going to end up falling back on sort of last touch or last click attribution. And so you're tying it to outcomes, but you're doing it in a narrow and sometimes blinkered way, potentially double counting the impact, potentially undercounting, whereas the opportunity to tie this in, or the goal of tying this in and elevating those, laddering up to the corporate metrics and the corporate key performance indicators, allows you to sort of say why these things matter. Why does a click or an open? Do we know what that correlates to, et cetera? So we're not saying abandon them. We're saying make sure you're tying those into the corporate metrics. And again, encouraging the marketing team to learn to speak business results and business outcomes as opposed to just marketing speak. Both are important. All of that requires really good view on data. You know, every single interaction with a customer is an opportunity to learn something about them. You know, you capture data when you're using data to reach out. You're also capturing data based on how it's received, and so even if there's no response, that's a valuable insight. But that value is dependent on sort of combining all of the data you have on a given customer, integrating it sort of into a universal view of the customer, universal profiles with which to understand and then analyze that data at a more holistic level. And again, I'm guessing we'll probably hear more on this from Tate later on. But the vast majority of companies that I speak to, you know, one of their challenges is that they still store data in different formats, platforms, systems, and it just makes it really difficult to comprehend the impact of marketing activity. And it's sort of not, again, there's no easy button to this, right? It requires thoughtful planning, skilled people, the right technology, and it requires you to operate at the speed of customers. And yet only 40% of marketers in a Salesforce study from the beginning of this year said that they have automated that data integration. And in the same study, only 33% said they strongly agree that they gain insights fast enough for meaningful decision making. That's really important. It used to be that we could spend weeks or even months looking at the impact of marketing decisions, doing sort of long-term longitudinal media mix models and that type of thing. In today's consumer environment, it's just not quick enough. We need to be able to ingest, integrate, analyze that data in order to make a meaningful decision really, really quickly. And the marketers can't do that by themselves, right? So you're going to have to work with data and IT teams, whatever tech platforms you work with, whether that's a CDP or something else. It's really important for the CMO and any of you that are aspiring to be a CMO, really important to become conversant in the data and technology world. You don't need to be able to code, but you do need to recognize that your entire operation and organization relies on it. And you need to be able to have meaningful conversations with the IT organization to get where you need to go.
Hey, Dave, is a CDP necessary?
Is it necessary? Not necessarily, but to capture, there needs to be something. There needs to be an underlying technology that does not necessarily need to be a CDP. But I think a CDP on top of that underlying technology allows marketers to operate at that pace level. The speed at which data is coming in, especially digital data, is very, very difficult for traditional platforms. And so what we typically see in the most advanced companies is that they have some sort of data lake, warehouse, insert buzzword of choice, a CDP sitting on top of it to enable that sort of real-time, quote unquote, capture and decision making. Very, very hard to do with traditional methods. So I've been a CDP skeptic, but they definitely have their role. And increasingly we're seeing a really valuable role in organizations, again, for that timeliness factor. It makes a huge difference. The last point I want to make in this section is about sort of the importance of aligning plans and metrics. And again, that may not sound like new news, but again, so many companies that we interact with, their marketing teams, and not just marketing teams, but teams in general, operating in silos. The marketing team organized around channels, objectives like acquisition or retention, set up in geographies. Again, different organizations, we have to structure in some way, but it's really important then to align that planning and having that consistent view of the customer underneath all of that. And those disjointed, siloed organizations inevitably lead to disparate planning, disparate experiences for the customer, and incomplete measurement. And so we see some people trying to overcome it with brute force, trying to do it with lookbacks, and like I said, the media mix modeling, but it's even those don't always align with their sort of functional and channel attribution scores. So you get a lot of, when things are going well, you get a lot of people claiming success, and when things are going poorly, you get a lot of finger pointing because of that lack of alignment. And again, only once this is laddered up to the business objectives, or rather not only when, but the logical thing is to ladder this up, use that for alignment. So if you can do that laddering, it helps cut down on a poor customer experience too, because those plans are going to be integrated. You'll have a better sense of who the customer is, how you've spoken to them, how they've reacted. You'll be able to measure that, and you'll be able to act differently in the future. So let me finish up with sort of 4 practical things that you can do before we jump into the Q&A portion. And these are things that you can start right away. Some of them are going to take time, and some of them, some of them you're never going to be finished. You're constantly going to be working on this as you go. But the number one thing that we sort of wrote in the report that accompanies today's webinar is it's really important for the CMO to set the direction and stick to it. The CMO doesn't have to get down in the weeds worrying about sort of tech changes and sort of the nuances of ad ratings and those sorts of things. In fact, it's sort of important for them to rise above that and to empower their teams, enable them to do what they do under that framework, tied up to those business objectives. And the CMO then can act as the sort of connective tissue. I mentioned that importance of being able to work across other departments. So that connective tissue is both within the marketing team as well as across other departments in the executive teams. So 4 things we think that CMOs should specifically do. The first thing, I've referenced it, but I'm going to say it again, is sort of this notion of establishing outcome-oriented marketing objectives. Again, it might seem basic, And every time I say it to people, they're like, yep. And then you ask to see their plans and their metrics and everything else, and doesn't often even occur. So imperative that finance, the CFO or somebody on the finance team is bought into what you're doing. And that's part of the reason, as I say, that we think of this as a C-level initiative. And I think it's really important to establish regular check-ins, see how that is going over time, and ensure that any sort of adjustments that need to be made are identified early. Again, when I was doing the CMO research, it was really interesting the number of CMOs that said they're meeting weekly with the CFO, and that's, they're having breakfast. They're building up really strong relationships and constantly discussing the success of this. And then I think as they look within the organization, it's important to insist that any sort of discussion of marketing impact or any presentations or anything else about it absolutely is focused on those higher level objectives and metrics. Anything that is being discussed outside of that should be laddered up to it, as I've said a couple of times. And then they can also use that to sort of supplement external transactional data or other partner data. It gives them a frame of reference to sort of look at that success against those corporate metrics, looking at how are they performing against others in the industry, et cetera. Again, another reason for believing that this should be a senior level role is the notion of providing air cover for the marketing teams. As I say, they can set the direction, but then let the team get on with what they do once that sort of common set of objectives and metrics is established. And so allowing for experimentation with different approaches and tactics, if they can float high enough, it creates that buffer zone to test new things. It shouldn't be overly rigid that nothing new can be tried. I talked already about data and technology, but one of the things is to make sure that you're evaluating those things against those business objectives. CMOs today have one of the largest data and tech budgets in their organizations, and yet, as I said, not always a corresponding level of tech savviness. And so that can lead to mistakes. It can lead to a disjointed approach. It can lead to significant technical debt and bloat. And so, again, becoming conversant is really important. Finding the right partners, getting educated, something we strongly recommend. And the fourth one here is to just sort of, don't think of this as just a top-down, take the business strategy and apply it. Marketers are the closest, in most organizations, are closest to the customer. And that integrated view of customers, as they build that, they better understand the activities that drive customer and business value. They understand customer desires, wants, needs, preferences. Huge opportunity for marketers to sort of play that up and inform the business strategy. So that laddering works both ways. And if they can close that loop, it's that to me is what differentiates a CMO from sort of a really good VP of marketing. It's that ability to affect the business strategy and to inform the direction of the business. So I hope that gives some ideas and guidance to elevate your personal as well as your company's approach. But we are not done yet. So I'm really looking forward to digging in to some of the questions, discussing them with Tate and Kelsey. And so with that, Kelsey, let me hand it back to you.
That was great. Thank you, Dave. Before we get to the audience questions, we are now going to hear from Tate Olinghouse, Chief Client Officer at Acxiom. Welcome, Tate. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
So let's dive into a few questions. Tate, Acxiom specializes in data management and measurement. What's your perspective on measurement, and what are your thoughts on what Dave shared?
Well, first off, and with respect to what Dave shared, I thought the report was fantastic. The presentation that he just went through was very practical. I mean, in summary, for me, it was like, measurements required. It's essential. I think we all know that. It's got to be coordinated across the enterprise. It's difficult, and it's only getting harder. But other than that, all things are looking up relative to measurement. In terms of like Acxiom and our clients around measurement, we really focus on this whole concept of marketing accountability. There's got to be a direct link between marketing dollars and those business outcomes or customer experiences that Dave mentioned. And as he also noted, there is persistent fragmentation across the ad tech and MarTech space. And on top of that, within most of the brands that we work with, the data that's required for measurement is siloed across the enterprise. They've also mentioned that the CFO is very keenly aware of measurement KPIs, and that's right. But being accountable and elevating those metrics for marketing also means that, again, going back to this whole concept of outcome, we measure on outcome to demonstrate the ROI, to justify the spend, right? Because it's driving a specific outcome that's measurable for the business. We also think marketing needs to be personalized based on the insights you know about that particular consumer, such that you can create value through your engagement. And when you create value exchange with the consumer through the engagement, it builds trust and differentiation. So, as I talk through all of that, I mean, it's like, yes, we all agree with that, but how do I make that happen? So it may be not come as a surprise to you all that we think that this comes down to unifying data and data management, right? And the whole concept of data management on the surface may seem not super exciting, right? But it's required to drive insights that will inform your marketing plans and your interactions with your customers. So we talk about unifying data and data management for effective measurement. There's really three things that are really important. The ecosystem is littered with data. Our clients are drowning in it. It's all over the place. So it's very important to determine the data that matters. And that obviously varies by industry, and we help our clients sort of sort through that. Number two, build an identity resolution capability that is based on your own first-party data, with your first-party data as the spine. Certainly, that can be augmented by other data sets, third-party data, other identity keys, but basing it on your data that you own, your first-party data, puts you in control and eliminates the dependencies on a third-party cookie or a walled garden, et cetera. Third, and finally, it's important to select the best platform and tool set for measurement. And we work with our clients and consult with them to help them make these selections. Certainly more and more, we're seeing measurement in the cloud for the obvious advantages of scale, speed, and connectivity to other data sources, et cetera. So that's just sort of our initial thoughts, both on what Dave presented and our thoughts around measurement.
Very interesting. Can you share how you pull data, how you pull out the right data?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kelsey. Thank you. So when I talk to clients about pulling the right data, the way that I sort of frame it up is like finding the data that matters. And again, increasingly, that's more and more difficult with all of the data that's out there, particularly the digital data exhaust that exists in that ecosystem. And it all starts with that business outcome we're trying to drive. So what are we trying to achieve? Most of the time, it is the data that provides customers insights on how to influence their buying journey. Next, we need to talk about how the data is going to be used. If the use case requires a real-time interaction with consumers, oftentimes that's a particular type of data set and capability, as Dave mentioned. If we're doing something in retrospect, that's also probably a different type of data sets that will be required. The final piece, of course, is the data required to measure. So the marketing effort can be optimized over time. Again, all of the data that you need will vary greatly across different industries. And we work with our clients to sort of help them figure out that challenge.
Do you see any reluctance from brands to move to the cloud?
You know, the crux of the matter is that cloud computing shifts the role of measurement from a retrospective perspective. We're seeing obviously the trend line for it not to be after the fact, but for it to happen in real time. It allows brands to ask better questions, to optimize the campaigns faster, which allows them to adapt to the changing consumer expectations midstream, as opposed to waiting until the end of the campaign and then starting over, which is how we've traditionally done that, the industry has. But to answer your question, yes. In fact, our CEO, Tate Olinghouse, just wrote a piece for The Drum where he talked about marketers being cloud reluctant due to security reasons. But the reality is that cloud providers use the latest technologies and they ensure very strong security. And as long as the cloud environment is configured correctly, brands can even add additional layers of security and privacy capabilities on top of it to make it more secure. Of course, cloud providers, brands, and their viability ongoing in the market is dependent upon their security. They know that. It's why it's a core competency and an area of great focus for them. Cloud also reduces the necessity for data redundancy. So enabling data to be used effectively and permissibly by a variety of marketing platforms while staying just in one place rather than being moved around and copied. One might even make an argument that that is making the data even more secure because it's not in transit all the time. And then cloud also unlocks capabilities that are not being built for data centers. For example, the best clean room capabilities are now cloud driven. Frankly, I find in talking with clients and working with them, the biggest driver of hesitancy to move to cloud is actually getting the data migrated to a cloud. It's a heavy lift. It goes into a queue within their internal IT, and they've got to prioritize it. Of course, if we do an effective job of measuring our marketing, talk about the incremental benefits that we would get by migrating some of these cloud platforms, we can increase the prioritization of those efforts.
Great. So how should marketers get started?
I think there's really, I would focus on a couple things. I'll go back to where I started, which was unifying the data and creating a first-party data resolution capability. It's essential to be able to recognize consumers across all those channels to be able to measure. You got to be able to identify them. The other thing that I would also stress here around first-party data is when you start with your data, you're in control, not a third party. This whole topic is the #1 conversation we've been having with our clients over the past year, and I don't see it slowing down going forward. That's the topic of identity. Based on a personalization study we just did with Sitecore, companies are prioritizing first-party data and the importance of it. Of the 400 surveyed, 60% said it's been a priority for years. 40% of them said the priority has actually increased over the last 2 years. And in terms of getting started, the second really important thing is define what success looks like. So we want to avoid the trap of being enamored with a shiny new platform or capability just because there's market buzz around it. What are we trying to achieve? Is it better understanding of your customers? Is it solving for the holy grail of multi-touch attribution? Is it just measuring the performance of a specific campaign? At Acxiom, we've got a lot of data scientists and that can help in that process, looking at the data, determining the data that matters, and looking at the current capabilities that our clients have and that you all have, so we can talk about what needs to be added to it, not to full rip and replace, but maybe how we can complement and optimize the investments that have already been made and help drive those business outcomes that are essential for the business.
Thank you, Tate. Now it's time to get into our audience Q&A. We've received a lot of great questions. Great. Okay, so we struggle to compare the impact of our marketing initiatives because our data is siloed in different systems and across different parts of the business. How can we justify the investment to integrate the data in order to get a more accurate picture of our marketing impact?
I can jump in on that one first to be I think, first of all, you are not alone. Like I said earlier, we hear that from so many organizations, just that data is siloed. I think that the way to justify the investment, I think there's a few things I would say. And it's it's going to tie back to some of what we discussed in terms of understanding the customer, understanding the impact of customer experience, and showing how that experience is being affected by data being dispersed. I've seen companies do this as basic as showing an individual customer how many pieces of communication did they get in a period of time, and showing that because data is sitting in an email system, a mobile system, a service system, whatever it might be, that they're getting so bombarded with different messages or from different parts of the business. So the first thing I would suggest is just an audit, understand what the customer impact is. Nothing is going to talk louder internally than showing how this is impacting the customer, and then what the impact of that is. Are people leaving because of it? Are they complaining because of it, etc.? Next up, I think, is look at what does exist and where it exists and how easy it would be to bring it together. So start that conversation internally, understand, is there a single platform that somebody's using that we could start to migrate to, or do we need something new? So that's going to require conversation. There's partners out there that can help you think that through. But the first thing I would do is start to think about this from the customer's point of view, and just that audit, both of what's happening to the customer and what systems are we using, how easy would it be, how expensive would it be, and then again, it comes back to that laddering up the metrics. If we can send out fewer pieces of communication, if that results in more satisfaction, better response rates, longer term relationships, more share of wallet, those things have to be proven out, but they'd be the things I'd be looking to prove that we can do these things. And there's plenty of benchmarks out there of other companies that have done this too.
Great. This is a question for Tate. Are there different perspectives from the industries you serve about the importance of measurement?
Yeah, yes, certainly there are, and it varies widely across those industry segments. If we think about retail, we know that the digitalization of retail and how consumers are purchasing from retailers is going more digital. That was only accelerated in the pandemic. You put on top of that supply chain disruption, geopolitical events, and inflation, and it becomes a very, very difficult environment. Retailers have to deal with a lot of data, right? Like we all do, but they have a lot of digital data, the concern about third-party cookies ongoing. Most of our retailers are really looking to shore up their first-party data and better leverage their MarTech and AdTech investments for omni-channel measurement. All three of those are linked together. All are required to do effective measurement and survive the market disruption. When we think about travel and hospitality, this is a really interesting one. So historically, the travel and hospitality business, the underpinning of that business has been the business traveler. And if you think about it, I know for me, business travel completely halted. It's coming back in spots. But I also have been in airports lately, and they're very crowded, right? And it's personal vacation and travel that's come back. It's that pent-up demand that we see. And the point is this: all of the historical measurements that travel and hospitality have used based on business travel are no longer relevant. Loyalty programs are suboptimal in this environment for personal travel. And what complicates things even more is that if personal travels is really driving the market, it's essential to be able to engage with the consumer when they're in market, because if you miss that opportunity, you're not going to get another shot for another 6 to 12 months. So travel and hospitality brands need to tune and collect and curate better insights about consumers, look at those different market signals in the buyer journal, buying journey, so they can be engaged in a meaningful way when consumers act. We work with a lot of telco providers. That sector has historically thrived on acquisition. And that's certainly still a focus we see, but today there's a greater focus on retaining and growing consumers, reducing the churn in the customer base. So how do they do this? They're focused on monitoring and analyzing data, and that data exhaust that's generated through customer engagement, and then they measure the effectiveness of the tactics that they've deployed. We work with lots of industries. Last one I would just touch on, I'm not going to hit on all of them, but financial services. Accurate measurement has been critical for FI marketers for a long time, and it's now tied to business outcomes more than ever. A lot of the larger FIs that we work with, they have staffs of PhDs for measurement. Because, for example, if they cannot attribute a new account to a marketing effort, those budgets will be moved to another channel or to another line of business. To share a quick story, I was once in a meeting with a CMO for a larger financial institution. There was other company leadership present. They said, if I give you $10 million more for your marketing budget, can you tell me how many more accounts I'm going to have? If I cut your budget by $10 million, how many accounts are we going to lose or are we going to miss out on? There was not a great answer to that question. Not surprisingly, that CMO did not last much longer. That is a true story, and it just drives home the importance of having measurement capabilities tied to business outcomes.
Absolutely. Considering all the privacy concerns, should we stay away from second-party data partnerships with partners?
So there's two questions in there in a way, right? The privacy side of it. I think the second party data is really important. And just in the interest of time, Tate, I know you guys have done a lot of work in this world. Do you want to jump in on that? Yeah,
I mean, the short answer is no, we do not think that you should stay away from second party data partnerships. We believe that you should lean into them. Yes, there are privacy and compliance concerns, but if done correctly, like in a clean room solution, it can unlock tremendous insights around your customers and prospects. The reality is that other brands just have different data than you have. and it can transform your understanding of a consumer from sort of a black and white image to a full color image. There's two things really quickly I would tell you about Acxiom. We are experts in privacy and compliance. We're active in public policy at the federal and the state level. We were the first company to have a chief privacy officer, not like 10 years ago, like 25 to 30 years ago. So we do a lot of work in this area, helping our clients navigate these ever-changing waters. The second thing I'll say about Acxiom is, like, we've been doing clean rooms since before that term was even coined. For a long time, we've been doing second-party data exchanges, and we started doing them in some really highly regulated industry segments. So we do a lot of work with our clients around how to do second-party data exchanges, how to do clean rooms effectively, but do it in a way that's privacy and compliant.
Great. Well, we have time for one last question, and this is a great one. Why does the cookie keep getting a stay of execution? Is it purely a financial risk story?
Yeah, this was probably an inevitable question after yesterday's announcement. But I think the first thing I would say is Google has given the cookie a stay of execution, but that's not true across the whole industry, right? So, Apple and Firefox and others have made moves way sooner than Google. Google just keeps kicking the can, and I think it's a more difficult thing for them to sort out. Mostly for commercial reasons, right? So they need to develop a solution that is sort of useful and desirable to advertisers and partners, that is feasible technologically, that is acceptable to regulators, and is commercially viable for Google. And so my sense is they failed to do that, and so that's the reason they're kicking the can. It's probably a conversation that we could do another webinar on, just dedicated to that by itself. But as I said earlier, I think there's a lot of solutions out there. I think yesterday you probably got a collective sucking in of breath by a lot of VCs and others that have invested in this area, marketers that are experimenting in different areas. It's another area where it's just difficult to understand what's going on. But I think it's important to remember that this isn't just Google is not the industry, and there are solutions that are being developed. And again, it's an experimentation, and consolidation is likely to happen. It's just happening at different speeds across different parts of the ecosystem.
Right, fantastic. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thanks again for Dave for joining us, and a very special thanks to Tate and to the team at Acxiom. Our eMarketer production crew behind the scenes also deserves a huge thanks for making this webinar possible. As promised, we will email you soon with a link to the slides and full recording. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your workday.